Great. Thanks, Scott and David. Yeah, it's my honor to introduce Tyler Sweat, who's going to moderate our next panel on the new defense base. Tyler is the Vice President for Mission Integration at Second Front Systems, where he works to break down barriers between innovative technologies and national security organizations. Tyler is also a technical advisor at Pale Advisors, a member of the National Security Advisory Board at Calypso AI, and an active advisor with multiple early stage companies and entrepreneurs. Previously, Tyler was the head of national security for Calypso AI, securing first revenue and growing year-over-year sales over 800%, driving the team through a successful A round of funding. Additionally, Tyler founded and later sold the consulting firm Future Tense, was a director at the nationally renowned futurist consulting firm Toffler Associates, where he led the emerging technology and security practice. Formerly with Deloitte Consulting, Tyler is a proud graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point, Beat Navy, and a former officer in both the active and reserve components. Tyler, thanks for taking time from your schedule to join us today. You got a great panel, so take it away.
Hey, thank you very much, Bob. I appreciate it. And Beat Navy indeed. So I want to take a quick moment and introduce the panel we've got. Very fortunate to have some fantastic individuals and companies, organizations represented on this panel. We've got Chris Lynch, founder and CEO of Rebellion Defense. We've got Joe Larson from Endural Industries. We've got Jacqueline Tame from the Joint AI Center, and Peter Dixon from Second Front Systems. So representing a nice swath of folks who've been on both sides of the aisle, in government, outside of government, and have had pretty impressive careers to date. So really excited to see where we go. And thanks to everybody for tuning in and joining us. I'm recognizing that this conversation is going to go a bunch of different directions. I'm going to try to jump right into it and start. The groups on this panel, specifically Second Front, Endural and Rebellion, are all working to come in, become defense primes, change the way that the industry looks. My question that I want to open with is, while a lot's been said about the challenges of sort of how we've got here, maybe it's overregulation, maybe it's barriers to entry, buying patterns, things like that. As we look at our organizations coming in with venture backing and an opportunity to drive some change, my question is, how are we moving into this market to try to, in a responsible way, to try to set conditions for that sort of next generation to come behind us and to drive some of the change in a sustainable manner? And I'll open. Peter made eye contact, so I'll go with Peter first.
Appreciate the question, and it's a good one. So I think a lot's been said about the competition, if you will, between the traditional defense base and the class of venture-backed defense companies. A lot's been made in the media about, for instance, the competition between Distributed Common Ground Systems and Palantir. That sort of story, or Google pulling out of Maven. And so that sort of story or narrative is one I think that the media is quick to grab onto because it's interesting. But in fact, I think that is really a bit of a red herring. And I think the real story here is how the traditional defense base and the innovation base is really coming together to form more of a national security innovation base. And I think there's an opportunity here for the traditional defense companies to look at new entrants into the market, like Rebellion, Endural, Second Front, as a place to partner. And for our part, I think we really need to think about, as we come in and try and, in a beneficial way, disrupt the current incumbents, how do we sort of hold the faith with really the class of dual use companies, those startups and other companies that haven't always been treated fairly or have often found difficulty in coming into the defense ecosystem. And really that comes down to incentives. And if you look at the incentive structure, the venture-backed class of companies is coming in to ideally get huge margins in an unconstrained market. And so they spend 20 to 30% on user interface, and they're trying to expand as broadly as possible. Really what the Pentagon needs to think about is, as they've set the norms of behavior, it's in no small part on a cost plus basis, where defense primes are getting 12% and additional 6% on top of that in IRAD. And when a disruptive startup comes in and says, we're going to replace all of your people that you have on this contract with software, that there needs to be ways that that's viewed, or create efficiencies. There needs to be flexibility within those contracts and other things to allow that to take place, as opposed to the traditional defense companies just look at that startup and say, that would absolutely undermine the terms of this contract or the terms of this business deal, and we can't move forward. And so I think, something that we as new entrants into the, defense prime area look at is how can we really structure our contracts or our internal incentives that we don't fall into those same historic traps.
Thanks, Chris. I'd like to get your thoughts on that. As you look at coming in, what does that path look like, and what does sort of success look like as you get to the end of that path?
Sure. There are a couple things that I think about when I look at this space, and thought quite a bit about when we were creating Rebellion Defense. One, I think that it's important for people who want to come into this particular space, defense, national security, to realize that there's a huge benefit in bringing people in who don't understand the constraints of how this machine works. I'm a product of that. I think there's a huge benefit. And I also think that, hey, nobody else is going to come save us. We have to show up. We have to actually step into the mission. We have to believe that we can make an impact. And I believe that it's also incredibly helpful to be too stupid to know what you can't do, right? I'm going to jump in there. I'm going to go into this, and I know what success looks like. And I know that we need to make an order of magnitude impact. The challenge that I think that companies looking to come into this space need to do is bypass some of the traditional pattern recognition that venture-backed companies will have. And what do I mean by that? I think that this sector takes a lot more funding. I think that this sector takes a lot more patience. I think that it's easy to go fool yourself in this and get a bunch of things that feel really good around, putting in place things like SBIRs and CRADAs, which are not bad, but they're not going to be a thing that's going to sustain companies in this space. So I think it's really important to understand where you have to go. I also think that it's important for people who are coming into this space, and some of the things that are very unique here is that most of the networks in this area are orthogonal to traditional tech startups, right? The people that are here that you want to actually network with, that you actually want to spend time with, that are going to be your customers, are just generally not as accessible to a normal startup, where they could put up a web page and they can have people come sign up, and there's just a different way of going and thinking about your product. So I think all those things start to add up, but I think that there's something incredibly powerful about having unbelievably talented technical people who know what they're doing, live, breathe, and die software. I think that there's a huge amount of power that comes with bringing those people in. And then on the other side of it, I'll just call this out, that I think that within defense, it's really important to understand that just as we value, people who understand how to create, physical weapons platforms and understand how to make sure a plane stays in the sky, that we have to give the same amount of respect to the software, because software is the future of warfare, right? It is going to be the incredible flawless execution of technology and software that is going to enable that future to come together. And if the Department of Defense sees that as a highly valuable thing and says, hey, that's just as important as you know, the platforms that we're using or the sensors and how exquisite those are. If the Department of Defense values that in the same way, then we'll see incredible things. But it truly is important to realize it's hard, right? Bringing people into this space who don't traditionally show up in defense or national security, that is not a small amount of work. It is incredibly difficult. And then attracting and creating a market that is interesting enough for venture investment is also hard, right? Venture capital is incredibly good at investing in markets where they see that there's an opportunity. So I think that takes some introspection to say, why does traditional venture capital not invest as much in this space? And I think that we want to start to drill down on turning those things around.
It's a great point when you talk about sort of the value of the platform versus that changing understanding from a department perspective on the importance of software and what type of software. I'd add even that scalable software, that flexible software, not that highly customized. And I want to.
I'll make a comment. I once had somebody told me that, hey, the zeros and one, the bits, they're the easy part. We have to envision the really hard thing, which is like, where do we want to take this? And I'm like, it's backwards. Backwards. Actually creating that software is akin to like the best people are like playing in professional sports of nerddom, right? Like you want the nerds of coding. That's who we need in this space, because it's just not good enough if we get the B team to show up.
That's right. That's right. You know, and on that note, you know, we see things like the rise of software factories, the Joint AI Center, trying to take steps to start to mirror some of those commercial best practices on maybe bringing agile in. And we see DevSecOps thrown around all the time and, you know, agile. So Jacqueline, sort of turning to you, you know, as you sit from the JAIC side of the house, where should the DoD be focusing more effort to continue to sort of close that gap with both that platform first vision, but also the speed at which we operate and some of the procedural or bureaucratic constraints that create a significant friction between that pace of building software and the pace with which DoD thinks about integration and procurement?
Yeah, thanks. And great to be here with my co-panelists. I look forward to meeting all of you at some point, not virtually. Yeah, so this is, I hate to sort of say that cliche, like this is a great question, but it is a great question, right? And it's one that we're sort of debating in real time, even kind of leading up to this panel. I'll actually start with something that's not sexy at all, but it is education. And what I mean by that is we have a long way to go in terms of both educating all of our department stakeholders at the senior most leadership levels, our congressional partners and overseers, as well as our partners, you know, in the VC community and industry, et cetera, about the challenges that we're facing, about kind of what the benefits of what we're trying to do in this space are, about the movement, the migration away from a very sort of hardware-centric mindset, focus, investment tendency, and frankly, the entirety of the DoD's, you know, PPBE process, the way in which we sort of plan for and acquire and then, you know, build things is very hardware centric, right? This is not new. This is something that's been sort of said a lot in testimony recently, you know, whether it's on the National Security Commission on AI or other places, but there's just a lot of education that I think we're sort of realizing that we actually have to do from the JAIC within other DoD components, et cetera, to all of our stakeholders and partners about kind of where we have to start. I think that there has been, I think that there is, and rightfully so, I think a lot of kind of hope around things like AI and, you know, sort of treating it like a panacea, right? Like throw some AI on there, sprinkle some AI on this, you know, platform or in this component, and we'll be good to go. And when you really sort of dig down, and, you know, I've had to do this myself, I'm not a technologist, but like the truth is the department at this point is just not AI ready, not at scale, not in the way in which we're supposed to be, not the way in which we're going to need to be to really compete effectively. And I think that that's where this sort of notion of this really different idea of a public-private partnership has to come into play, right? This is something that I've been touting in the Intel space where I grew up for the last decade or more. You know, we need to sort of stop thinking about, and I'll use a very Intel, specific example. We need to stop thinking about green badges, which is the color of badge that you sort of give to, contract or commercial industry support, and blue badges, which is sort of the military civilian badge, right? We need to start thinking about how are we going to leverage the full suite of capabilities that each part of this kind of national security, industrial base, or however you want to call it, brings to bear. And one of the things that we're really grappling with, frankly, at the JAIC is, there are a lot of different perspectives, external perspectives, and perspectives that we want to take into account, that we want to honor, that we want to kind of go back and forth with in terms of debate on whether or not we need in the department to be growing our own, to Chris's point, exquisite data scientists and engineers, et cetera, whether we need to be sort of procuring those people or partnering with them in terms of sort of, contracts, whether it needs to be a hybrid of both, where those people would need to sit and how we would actually even train them at scale. What does that look like in terms of a sort of military service member's career track? If we really want to, if I want the person that's kind of developing the back end for Netflix to work in the Department of Defense and kind of do that level of real technical work for us, how would we even think about grow that person, incentivize them to stay, frankly, in terms of the legacy kind of equipment and training that we currently have to bear? And then how do we work with, our congressional partners in particular to really ensure that all of the on-ramps and off-ramps in terms of career progression are feasible at different stages of life for different sort of technical needs. So I think I've probably deviated pretty significantly from your original question, but the bottom line in terms of where we are right now is like, we're trying to get our arms around, I want to be very, very transparent. Like, we're trying to get our arms around the magnitude of this problem. And we are focused on AI, but frankly, when you sort of start to pull that thread, nobody really knows what that means anyway. So it's kind of probably, encompassing the entirety of the panel. And I think that just to kind of go back to the beginning of where I started here, I think we're learning so much. The JAIC is about 2 years old at this point, and I was just having this conversation with our new director, General Crone. The amount of things that we have learned about how not AI ready the department is in those 2 years is staggering. But then how do we leverage this kind of new this new industrial base, or this sort of industrial base 2.0, or however we want to call it, to fill in those gaps, but also recognizing and just once again drawing on Chris's point, we need that, that talent that doesn't know enough not to ask the questions about how we do business. We also need the people that actually understand how the department works and how contracts get let today, because until we transition the current processes and policies that we have in place, we still need to work within and operate within that paradigm. And so if we don't have sort of this both mindsets sitting side by side and trying to do this together, I think we fail either way. Not to leave it on a low note like that, but that's where I am.
No, I appreciate that. And I want to follow that up with a quick follow-on question to Joe. Joe, I know you were part of Maven in some of the early days, and we've had some conversations about things like JADC2 or ABMS. How have you seen sort of the evolution of both the attempts for the department to better align and communicate with some of these commercial providers, but also that technical literacy around, what is traditional sort of commercial software development and what is, maybe a DoD specific integration that we're slapping on top of a bunch of disparate systems? Have you seen any changes there, and what do you think they should be worried about?
Well, I mean, there's no doubt the department is getting better every day. They're improving. I would just, emphasize my total agreement with everything my two colleagues on the panel have said before regarding the problems, and they say it so eloquently. I wouldn't disagree with a word they said. So the question is, how do we move into the future, right, and continue to evolve and get better? In your initial framing of, so I work out of Anduril. Your initial framing of Anduril was, and Rebellion, and I don't want to speak for Chris, but that we aspire to, be the new software primes. And I find it interesting. I mean, that even that question alone kind of shows our sort of cultural, even linguistic challenges in doing this, right? Because I don't really think we do aspire to be a software prime. I think in a JADC2 and in an ABMS world, there should not be a software prime. What a software prime means to me, just as an old DoD hand, right, is like, you've got your cost accounting system down, you've got competitive labor rates, you're able to do effective lobbying, and your expectation for the government is they're going to provide you their wealth of written requirements, and then you're going to execute them in the manner you see fit, right? And the government will, of course, own that intellectual property. And I think it's a very appropriate and strong approach for previous generations of the Department of Defense, as Chris alluded to. It's actually probably the only way to build an aircraft carrier or a jet. But your question was specifically about JADC2 and ABMS, so I would question in those specific constructs if primes are really the right way to go. The ability to interface with various legacy systems and bring them together, right? The challenges of dealing with disparate forms of data, the challenges of understanding the implications of artificial intelligence, as the Jake so eloquently represented. The department does not have their arms around it. I'm not sure anybody does, right? It's like getting your arms around the wind. I don't think industry has their arms around AI yet. I mean, nobody has their arms around these technologies. So, my recommendation for the continued evolution of these things is to not try to bring that prime construct to these problem sets. Consider more experimental approaches. Consider making large bets on non-traditional companies to deliver value at scale and, within an end-to-end solution for the problem you're trying to solve that isn't necessarily a hardware or platform. And I think that's really the piece that's missing, because while the department has evolved, and there are a number of great programs out there, and the number of startups doing DoD work has certainly increased, I don't think we've seen any of them really get the chance to do something big, to solve a really meaty problem. In most cases, probably the vast majority of DoD contracts, and I know the analysis is out there, the startup that's a part of that contract has received a subcontract through a prime. It's for a discrete capability. If it's an AI company, it's probably a refactoring of a commercial product. And they probably actually care more about selling their commercial product than they do the DoD work. They may be happy to take some incremental revenue, continue to advance their product, but they're certainly not going to, solve your problem end to end, and they'll just contribute to a prime. And the prime won't really bring probably the type of solution you need for these types of problem sets. So, if I were to advise the department for JADC2 and ABMS, I would advise that the answer here is to probably try taking a big risk. Try investing in a non-traditional with really good software talent that has a more modern software development approach to solve your problem at scale. And then in turn, the DoD needs to embrace a culture, by the way, of reducing its risk aversion, and it's increasing its tolerance for failure amongst its program PMs. I've been a program PM and in the DoD, you run 14 lines of effort, and if one of them fails, you're fired. That does not work in technology, where probably the vast majority of your bets don't work. It's that one that does work that changes the game. And probably we need to change the culture in order to embrace that type of mentality, particularly around these problem sets.
I appreciate sort of the reframing in terms of what lens we're looking at things through with that prime sub relationship and that scale. I know Chris has got some thoughts on that, so I want to turn to Chris real quick.
Joe, I completely agree about this idea of prime. To me, prime is born out of the idea of acquisition in a variety of different things. Here's what I want to do and what we want to do at Rebellion, and I think that there are companies like Anduril and what Peter and his team are doing that are just very much focused on this. We want to build amazing software companies and technology companies that are going to have an impact on the mission. And I think that that's incredibly important to realize. And when I look at the industry, and if I look at this precious thing that we call the defense industrial base, we have unbelievable companies that are so good at building hardware. They have been around as partners in the defense space for a very, very long time. There are services companies that are very, very good at doing what services companies do, right? hey, tell us where to go. We're going to head that way. And we'll do time and materials, and we'll do all those things that Peter and Joe and Jacqueline have been talking about. But here's the thing. If you want to have software built, you're going to turn to people who build software. You're going to turn to software companies, right? And they're going to hire people who want to ship products. And you know what they don't want to do? They don't want to do prototyping, development, and sustainment, right? Because nobody develops software like that anymore, right? It's incredibly important to realize that the trade craft of building software in the things that are going to run the future of literally the future of what warfare looks like are going to rely upon the flawless execution of all this software that's going to tie all these things together. When we think about things like JADC2 and all this stuff, at the end of the day, really what it's saying is, hey, we're going to have some pretty amazing technology that's going to connect with one another. And we're going to have some people who are incredible at building hardware and some people who are going to be exceptional at building software. But if we don't attract that talent into this space, and if we don't let them run at problems that are meaningful and impactful, then we're just not going to do it. I can't, I go and I speak at a lot of these engineering classes at a variety of different universities. And I can tell you that if the pitch is come build a software prime, or come build a prime, or come work at a defense contractor, that's not the thing that's resonating with them. They want to do things that matter. They want to work on really amazing hard problems. And we talk about how we have amazing and hard problems in this space, but we actually have to let them go build it, right? And that's my whole comment about, hey, we need people who are going to show up who are unbelievable at what they do. And you know what they need to be? They need to literally, I love this phrase, just be too stupid to know what you can't do. Just go do it. And we need to bring them into the space. But I don't think that, at least for me, we wanted to build a company that was going to build that place in the future. And we wanted to build it now. And one last little thing that I'll just mention is software companies, when they think about building software, they don't think about it as prototyping, development, and sustainment. They think about it that it's a thing that's going to continue to evolve, and we're going to deploy it really fast, and we're going to learn. Doesn't mean that we're throwing safety out the door. Didn't say that at all. It just means that it's going to move very fast. And that's incredibly important, because if we bring those people in, they're going to build things that could scale out to serve the mission of defense across the world with high scale, high availability systems, incredibly safe, redundant systems, but also pushing us to the forefront of technology and getting us out of things like PowerPoint, getting us out of things like Excel, right? There's too much that is relying upon those two products, and we need to get out of those things.
Yeah, so I appreciate that, both of you, and Chris, we used to make the joke all the time, right, that AI in the department's on PowerPoint. If it's in Python, then you've probably got some machine learning floating around in there. And I want to talk about, Chris alluded to the need for speed and scale, and the ability to take that elegant product that engineer or that dev team wants to ship, and to have it transcend a single use case and start to apply at an enterprise level. And I want to talk about, we've seen the calls that, hey, we're in a technology arms race, and it's imperative right now for us to innovate at the speed of relevance or the speed of conflict. There's a tagline in every service right now. And then you look at recent GAO reports where I think 72%, I might be off by a point or two, 72% of software in major defense acquisition programs are custom, not modified GOTS, not modified COTS, not COTS, highly custom. And they require that sort of long tail, Chris, that you're talking about, that software companies don't build like that. They require that long O&M, sustainment. You get into very sort of hairy kind of vendor lock where you can't really go any other direction because you're already pot committed. As we start to think about breaking down some of those barriers and getting the department to think sort of in that enterprise, in that SaaS sort of mindset, I want to turn to Peter and Jacqueline, because I know I've talked to both of you guys about this. What steps can the department take to start to almost kind of meet in the middle? Because you hear what Chris is describing and what Joe's describing, and I bet there's a lot of people in the audience who are like, yes, I want to go charge up that hill. That's awesome. That's what I want to do. And then you sort of get up there and you see the box you've got to fit all that passion, desire, and elegant product into. And a lot of times it really, it just doesn't align. So I'll go to Jacqueline first and then to Peter.
Yeah, so one of the things that I personally have sort of put my heart and soul into throughout my career in furtherance of getting to what you're talking about is just illuminating for department leadership and frankly for congressional partners and leadership and our industry partners at some level, all of the things that we've actually told ourselves to do and the processes that we've actually put into place across the department. And what I mean by that is we have literally tens of thousands of DoD issuances, which are sort of our policy documents. We have obviously statute, we have legislative language, we have regulation, we have all these things that it sounds like you guys have talked about in previous sessions today. But in the department alone, we have an inordinate amount of this. And one of the reasons that I was so excited by the JAIC's potential was to be able to start to tackle some of these things by leveraging AI and enabled capabilities. So we have, for example, we have what I would consider sort of a flagship product in our business process transformation line at the JAIC called Game Changer. And this is something that's near and dear to my heart. It's something that I actually brought to the JAIC from my Intel background. That was just about, it's NLP, right? The technology for just looking across all of the different PDF documents of the policy and the regulations that we have, and just being able to extract and make connections and glean insights has never been there before. We've never had all of the sort of requirements that the department has, all of the roles and responsibilities and authorities that each component actually has to execute and is technically held accountable to, and technically their budgets should reflect this. We've never had that all in one space. We've never been able to look across and say, I know why I can't ATO something within, this amount of time. It's because 48 different components have the same responsibility to check mark this on day 13 of that ATO process, and I only knew about 24 of them, and I've only filled out the paperwork for 16 of them, right? So not having this really, really comprehensive understanding of what we actually have told ourselves, the processes that we've put in place, who technically is in charge of each one of those, and how many different ways in which we've written language to describe those roles and responsibilities and authorities and requirements has really, frankly, paralyzed us in a lot of ways. And I think that that's one of the fundamental reasons. It's not sexy, right? Like policy is not sexy. And I say this all the time. It's sexy to me. It's just not sexy to most people. But if we don't kind of just do the bare minimum of really like figuring out what these barriers to entry are for all the things that you're talking about, to build it, to deploy it, to acquire it, to figure out what the security balance versus the sort of operational need balance is. If we don't have a good understanding of what we've already sort of inflicted upon ourselves, and if we're not able to go back to Congress and other federal partners, frankly, and OMB and the White House, and tell them this is what we've inflicted upon ourselves over years and years of not paying attention to this propagation of policy and regulation, frankly, then we can't actually move these barriers out of the way. And so Game Changer is one example, and it's cross-departmental. We're working with Comptroller, and we're working with the Advana, and USCINS, and like a bunch of different components to build this. We're building it. The amount of, and I'll just, air a lot of dirty laundry here, right? Because why not? I mean, the amount of pain that we've had to go through to ensure that we are working with multiple industry and academic partners on the build of this, but that it was GOTS, at the end of the day, to ensure that we could have industry and government data scientists sitting side by side in the same dev environment, like coding together. It has been so painful to just be able to do that. It has taken us months and months to actually put those things into place, to identify why we thought we couldn't, or why we in reality couldn't do those things, and then move those things out of the way. And so that's the area in which I am really, really passionate and focused. And that's one of the key areas why, if you hear sort of the JAIC has a really big focus on policy, this is the reason, right? It's not about writing AI and AI, policy, although I actually think that policy at the end of the day should effectively be metadata, but that's for a different day. But at the end of the day, like if you don't know what's in your way, you can't do this. You can't do all the things that we're talking about. You don't know that, you know, section 845 of FY20 NDAA is going to tell you to do this for agile software or whatever. And so just getting our arms around that is what I am really championing as part of my job here, and one of the sort of big things that the JAIC is really trying to do for the broader department.
Awesome. Thank you. And Peter, we've talked a bunch about speed and procurement and agility and all of that. Love to hear sort of your take on some of those barriers and where you're seeing progress and where you want to see more effort.
Yeah, Jacqueline, I'll just say that we here at Second Front also think that process is sexy. So you're not alone in that. So I'm just trying to imagine who's watching this, who's on the other side of the Zoom. When you're up on a stage, you can kind of look at the audience and one, to make sure that nobody's falling asleep and you have everyone's attention, but kind of, see if it's a bunch of t-shirts or a bunch of, suits, or get a sense of who you're talking to in terms of the crowd. And since we don't totally have the benefit of that, I'll maybe just speak to a couple of different groups that I think might be in the audience. And so I saw one question here from Elizabeth Waters, just saying, are the opportunities through the DIBs? And, to a large extent, they traditionally are. And so what we're all talking about here on the stage is some version of the Valley of Death, which for the four people who are watching who may not know what that is, that really is the dearth of money and opportunities in between the pilots and the prototypes, where places like Defense Innovation Unit operate, and where the traditional defense systems integrators operate with congressionally apportioned money on a 2-year planning cycle. The problem is that if you make it successfully through the pilot prototype phase and you find that mission fit and everything that you've done has gone well, you essentially almost have a 2-year gap, right? Before you then can get into, a planning cycle. And so the easiest way to address that is to then just go and sub to a prime. And so that's really where the Department of Defense is trying to address that process. And that process is really what what we as venture-backed defense companies are frankly trying to disrupt. I would say, to the extent that if you're on the left-hand side of that equation and you're a startup, what I would really suggest is that you specifically, if you're not aware of this, go look at the AFWERX program. And what AFWERX allows you to do is just put in a good idea without necessarily identifying who your customer is. And they will give you $50,000, or they will award you $50,000 to essentially go out and do business development. And so if you're a dual use company, you focus mainly on commercial and you're trying to think, should I operate maybe with DoD? Go partake in that process and it will underwrite the risk of starting to engage. The other thing that it then will do is give you sole source justification for follow-on contracting, which is a really big deal, and start you on a pipeline with the Air Force, but also allow you to move into somebody else's pipeline. And we at Second Front have worked with AFWERX, and we've modeled out what that entire pipeline looks like. And so if you just Google AFWERX and portfolio, you can get to their existing portfolio and you can see all of those companies that are already going through this process, and there are hundreds of them. If you are on the right-hand side of that equation, you're a big defense company, what I would say is, the way that all big companies, not just defense companies, do real innovation is not through their R&D budgets, it's through their acquisition budgets. And increasingly, the problem is the DoD moves into what used to be called the third offset, but essentially looks at dual use tech companies, is a lot of these companies don't necessarily want to be acquired by members of the traditional defense space. They want to be acquired by tech giants. And so if you're on the right-hand side of that valley of death and you're one of those big defense companies, I would really say you have an onus to move to the left. And what you are not taking advantage of most likely is the fact that you can use your IRAD budget, or you can use your small business set-aside budget with actually a 4-to-1 credit to invest in or otherwise work with a bunch of those companies that are in that dual use space. So I would suggest go to that AFWERX website and look at SBIR-backed companies that are in there that you might want to work with. Because if you're not working with those companies to pull in new innovation all the time and disrupt yourselves, then companies like, and Joe, I think I've been saying Anduril, but I'm apparently haven't listened, read Lord of the Rings in a while, and I've been pronouncing it wrong all these years. But companies like Anduril, no, and you'll have to correct me, but yeah, are going to come in and disrupt you, right? If you're not disrupting yourselves, then the venture capital community is going to fund companies like us who are going to come in and disrupt you. And so that is, I would say that the olive branch that I would offer, that's how you would work with companies in this ecosystem to make it one national security innovation base, as opposed to sort of two camps in opposition with each other. The final thing that I would say, just Jacqueline, is organizations like the Jake, right? You only get so long a runway to sort of admire the problem and convert on buzz and everything else. And at that point, you actually have to start working, at scale with these small companies and these small businesses. And so, especially in AI, where DoD has really not necessarily reaped all of the AI innovation that they have sown for many years through organizations like DARPA. I think it is very quickly going to be time to throw the switch and start working with companies. Otherwise, the word's getting out in the venture-backed community about what are the good organizations to focus on, and what are those that maybe aren't quite a ready bridge into the DoD.
Bushel of olive branches from Peter Dixon.
Sure.
Now I want to turn to Joe and Chris and sort of play on what Peter just touched on, right? It's easy to throw darts at some of the defense primes of being slow, rigid, maybe focused on butts and seats, or experts in hardware. I think, Chris, you brought this up earlier, right? Highly proficient at hardware and sort of stretching maybe out of necessity into software or through different sort of market consolidations. Peter just alluded to the need to bridge that gap, right? And we've got a speed problem that we've sort of talked about, some synchronization, but where have you guys seen some of these traditional primes taking steps to better sort of meet that startup or that software company where they are? Chris has already got the smile and off mute, so I'll go to him first.
Joe, I'll go first. I think that we're asking for something that is a little unfair. I think it's important to realize that companies culturally, the talent that they attract, the ways that they build, they tend to optimize to what the business is truly built for, right? I had another entrepreneur that I know who's said something to me that it's just stuck with me for the longest time. She was working a lot with special operations, and she had a meeting with a bunch of the people in a particular group there, and she said, "Hey," and she's a software engineer. She said, "Here's what I would like to do. I'd like to spend the next 3 weeks training with you to go on a raid. And I want you to take me on a raid with you, right? Downrange, someplace, after 3 weeks or 4 weeks of training." And then everybody just kind of looked at each other, and she said, "Well, of course that's stupid, but don't do it to me either." She's like, "I've trained my whole life to show up to this moment," right? And that's the thing, is organizations are optimized for what they do. And I think that is my whole point about recognizing the importance of what everybody brings to the table. Bridging the gap to me is not trying to be something that we're not. It's actually embracing and growing the network of who we look to change the future. And I think that one of the things that somebody else has brought up, I would highly encourage entrepreneurs in this space, do not build a company to be bought in this space. Build a company to change the world. If you build the company to sell in this space and have literally built all the metrics in order to do that, it won't matter. It won't matter one bit. And I can't think of anything more important. So I think that we have to get people who start companies in this space who are very, very good at what they bring to the table. And we, and I mean the collective United States, including the Department of Defense, look at it and say, hey, let's actually bring this in. Software is really important. And I don't want to confuse this one other thing. A long time ago, there's a programming language called Ada, which has, I don't even know if anybody knows what Ada is. Ada was created by the Department of Defense, right? It's a programming language, and it's really not used besides some really old systems, antiquated systems in place today. I don't think that it is fair on the same end to expect that the Department of Defense is going to all of a sudden attract all the nation's best talent and convince them to not go build a robot to deliver a salad, but to come build things inside. I think we have to think of the bridge as a mixture of all these things. And Jacqueline, I think you said it best, which is, look, this is an education thing. The benefit to all the software factories and all the things that we're doing, I think in one area comes into the fact that, hey, we're creating people who have great pattern recognition and understanding of problems in which technologies can actually help the mission. But it doesn't mean that somebody who's going to create an algorithm that is going to identify a particular target that is of interest to the United States Department of Defense or our allies or our partners tomorrow, it doesn't mean that they're going to be that person. I think that that's an unfair thing. The greatest change that has happened over the past 30 to 40 years since the Cold War is that the startup ecosystem, venture capital, this concept that we call Silicon Valley, really has grown to the point that it actually is much larger from an R&D investment perspective than anything that's coming from the United States government, anything at all. And so bridging that gap is incredibly important. Otherwise, we're trying to just duplicate something else that is much larger than anything that we have. Lastly, that doesn't mean that the blame is only on one side, on the venture capitalists, the people who are starting companies. If you don't think that this mission matters, and if you don't think that we can start companies in this space that can change it, you are wrong. You're absolutely wrong. And we have to, as a nation, say, no, we think that that's valuable and we think that this is important. We have to change it. But I think that it's going to take some bridging on both sides, but not in the way of trying to pretend that you're something that you're not. It's in embracing that ecosystem to grow larger than what it looks like today.
I appreciate that. I mean, it's the not trying to emulate something that you're not and sort of being comfortable where you are and finding ways to bridge between those, I think gets at the crux of it. You know, Joe, I'd be curious to hear sort of your thoughts after hearing Chris there. I think that hit on a lot of really interesting points.
It's always tough to follow Chris because
I feel bad every time I'm about to be like, hey, Joe, I'm like, sorry.
But, so all I can do is agree, right, and expand. The way I would say it, I'm Peter and Chris. I mean, they're thinking of big solutions to these problems. I'd put myself more in the category of somebody who is a government person. I work with elite software engineers. They're excited to do national security work, and my job is helping them. Like, it's basically translating a lot of the BS that comes with doing government work, right? And I can't tell you how many times I talk to a software engineer, and I slip, right, and I slip into DoD vernacular. And one of my favorite ones, and we've all used it in this meeting, is, I say you're a vendor. The company, they want to, and then they want to procure us. It's a procurement. These are very discouraging terms for software engineers. They don't want to be a vendor. They don't want to have a food truck, right? That you pull up to the side, you buy some software, and you move on. They want to be partners in solving hard problems. And there's nothing more deflating than having a success in doing that. I mean, forget failure. Failures happen all the time. I think we need to embrace them, but a success. And then the response is we need to go into quote unquote sustainment, which just means put on the brakes, right? Because that's very contrary to the mentality of a software engineer that, of course, is always thinking about growth, scaling, and attacking the next problem. So, so I do think like just even these terms make it very challenging. And I also think there's a piece of sort of pride of ownership that is unique to young software engineers and what they build that needs to be considered. I've seen this in the software factories. I've seen it in quote unquote the construct of Silicon Valley. The analogy I like to use is so in World War II, for example, Eisenhower, after the war, was asked, what were the key technologies that helped us win the war? And surprisingly, reading his response, he listed 3. One of them he listed was the Jeep, that like this piece of like commercial off the shelf, but like at the time an exquisitely developed and not to government requirements, tool was then applied for military use, scaled and like provided. And then after the war, the government didn't attempt to then say, well, we're going to own Jeep. It's going to be a military vehicle in perpetuity. They actually, released the intellectual property rights to Jeep to the, what became the Chrysler Corporation. And that led to a lot of the car boom of the 1950s, right? This like, hey, we don't own it. This is like a partnership with industry. The job of government is to create the market, right? And your original question about the primes, nobody's throwing darts at the primes. They're responding to the market that the government has created, right? So it's hard to blame them for the situation. So I do think we need to go back to first principles on these things. And I do think, to Chris's main point, to put a button on it, we need to just appreciate the exquisiteness of the talent and the eagerness of the talent to solve some of these problems and engineer quote unquote procurement and sustainment approaches that aren't that are other things that are deeper in partnerships to really leverage that talent at scale to solve some of these hard problems.
I appreciate that. And then your comment about, hey, they're responding to the conditions of the market is absolutely right. We've incentivized a whole bunch of behaviors where it's really easy to throw darts right now without looking at sort of where were those behaviors, where were they set, where were they conditioned? Is it how we're funding? Is it how we're regulating? They've been asked to operate in a box for decades. And now there's this immense growing pressure of, well, hey, you should be able to operate out of a box. So I appreciate that perspective and again, recognize the challenge. So we're running up, we got about 6 minutes left. I have a favorite sort of last question. I usually do. Given that we've got 6 minutes, I'm gonna ask Ichi to kind of keep it to about 60 seconds. So we've talked about a whole bunch of stuff today. We've talked about some of the challenges of those, new companies coming in, getting people excited about building military tech or defense tech. We've talked about the policy challenges and some of the understanding, hey, what are we even able to do? The tech literacy, the changing market, all this great stuff. So for each of you, my question is, if you had an easy button and you're king or queen for a day and you can change one thing, either sort of about what we're calling the sort of defense innovation based, defense industry based, or about sort of just the broader sort of department, what would it be and why? And I'll start with Jacqueline.
Knew you were going to do that to me. Harkening back to sort of my like obsession with policy would be an easy answer. So I'm not going to do that. So in my 45 remaining seconds, what I would say is, having been a staffer a couple of years ago, what I would actually change is, and I don't know how you do this, so that's for the next session. I would actually change some of the requirements on the tenures of congressional staff on committees in particular. You can't do it with members, I understand that. But for people that haven't come from the communities over which they are now really important overseers, there's an education timeline, there's a spin up timeline, and then there's a lack of information and transparency that they actually get in a lot of cases. And so they're making the best decisions that they can and advising the members in the best ways that they can. But if they're not there long enough overseeing that portfolio on that committee to really understand the no kidding problems that that department or that agency is facing, they're potentially going to advise on or generate legislation that reverses the course of exactly what we're trying to do here. And so I'm thinking about it. I don't know what the exact answer is, but I would really try to figure out if there was a way to actually, no kidding, extend the tenures of some of the sort of key staffers on these really important oversight committees to ensure that they understand what's happening and that they're actually helping to legislate in the right direction.
No, I like that. It's a great point about having the understanding to understand what is that sort of impact, that hand, what is the pen going to actually generate, and what it does have the potential to unravel. So thank you. Peter, I'll go to you.
Sure. So I guess if I was king for a day, I would do exactly what we're trying to do now, because we do have an easy button. We have a bunch of congressional authorities that have already been given to the national security community. We just have to get out of our own way and actually use them. And, you know, Joe and I were Marines on the ground together in Afghanistan. And, you know, we were taking a lot of casualties. You know, we lost a lot of men over there because we were basically in a fair fight with the Taliban. I mean, the Taliban, right? They had IEDs, we had airstrikes, and then it was just, we both had small arms, and it was an even playing field. You look at how much money we're spending for our military, what our innovation clusters around this country are able to produce. You know, I come from Silicon Valley, and the idea that we were in a fair fight was just stunning to me. And so, you know, I look at our average IT acquisition cycle right now in the Pentagon, and it's 105 months. It's 8 years. And so when people talk about, you know, acquisition reform, that terrifies me. Why are we trying to fix an 8-year system? We need to get rid of it, right? Use the authorities that we have to do this in a completely different way. Otherwise, we're on a level playing field with the Taliban downrange. We are not going to be able to compete in a technology arms race with the Chinese if we take this acquisition model and continue to handicap ourselves in this way. So that would be my king for a day move.
I like it. I appreciate that. I'm going to mix it up and let Joe go before Chris this time. So Joe, we'll go to you.
Thank goodness. Yeah, no, I would say that for me, if you did say like anything, right? I could just wave my wand.
Anything.
I would devolve really intense budgetary decision-making authorities to like PMs, like frankly, you know, people who, like Chris said, don't know what they don't know, that own huge problems in the defense system, and then you know, thoughtfully select them, empower them, and then reward them regardless of whether they fail or succeed based on the nature of the risks that they took. So, you know, this is like the main problem now is I feel like we hit at things, like we're constantly hitting at the core problem, and it's just bouncing off because prototypes don't get there, the budgets aren't there. I'm talking real budgets, you know what I mean, that can do thoughtful things and allowing those people to directly solve those problems. I'm talking about not thinking about, you know, where the creativity that they bring to bear is about the, you know, the acquisition approach. That's misplaced creativity. If you're a government PM and you're thinking, you know, what's my acquisition vehicle? What's my color of money? And you get very creative. That's good. That's the only way to do it now, but it's still wrong, right? Your problem solving should be focused on what is the technology you're trying to bring to bear to solve the problem. And I found that if they actually own the problem and they feel it in a very tangible way, you know, so like, you know, Peter and I mentioned, you know, Marines in Afghanistan, right? Marines really care about solving these problems deeply, and to the extent they're empowered to solve them, they're going to work hard and be creative in their approach to do it the right way. So, you know, I think this is the piece that's missing. I think there are ways to do it. And at the end of the day, we need to empower our PMs to make big bets on sort of non-traditional things that are more modern. We need to reward them for those bets, and we need to do lots of those bets, because just, you know, hoping to solve this problem using traditional approaches and like policy, that's not going to solve it, right? There's only to be solved through repetition and practice with that kind of approach.
I appreciate that. It's the doing the same thing over and over and over and expecting a different outcome, right? There's an old saying about that. Chris, I'll turn it to you for the sort of last thoughts around this one up. King for a day.
Mine is going to be somewhat different track here. The thing that I would remove is the belief that we deserve something less because it's the military or it's the United States government. I think that is the saddest attitude that I see over and over. If we say, well, we can't have that because, I don't think that that's true. I think that the women and the men who serve in our military and in the Department of Defense, I think that we shouldn't create excuses for where things are and just say, well, it is that way because. And I think that the change, if I could offer as to what the other side of that is, the change is to be outcome driven. The most successful things envision an outcome in sight and understanding that it is very, very hard. And it may involve eliminating policies that were written by people who were far removed from the problem or the understanding or the evolution of the technology that lays before us. And it's okay. It's okay to do things that are hard because we do deserve something better. And I think that if we hold on to that hope and that belief that we do deserve something better and we can have these things that are serving, that are helping the men and women who are serving, I think that that is a powerful place to be. And I would remove that. I would remove that excuse because I think that there's so many places where we say, oh, well, we can't hire this person because, oh, we can't buy this thing because, oh, you can't do that because. Flip it around. Let's find the way to it. Solve the problem. Solve the problem. And if we do that, I think that that's a pretty special place. I think that we would all be far happier with envisioning that future than one in which people sit around and they say, well, yeah, but it's the DoD. No, I don't buy that one bit. I don't buy it at all. So that's what I would change. That's the thing that I would modify.
That's outstanding. I mean, it's one, I think you're spot on. And two, I appreciate sort of the positivity of the ending there. And I see us getting sort of played off like it's the Oscars. So
No. This was fantastic. Tyler, every one of you, if I could buy you a beer or make you king for a day, queen for a day, I would do it. So the entire purpose of what we do is this discussion that you just had, the easy button discussion, king for a day, and the fair fight discussion. This is something we rally about all the time. It is not right for us to put our best and our brightest, our most important treasure, our people, in a fair fight in Afghanistan, let alone with the Chinese or whatever's coming next. And to hear over and over again, oh, we can't get there from here because it's the DoD, or it's the color of money, or I don't have the power, I don't understand the problem. This is completely unacceptable. And the technological innovation discussion that we're having that's not the essence of this. This is a leadership discussion. This is a leadership challenge. And this is all about, do we have the will and the grit to fundamentally change how we do business so that we can serve our best and our brightest? And I want to salute all of you because this is the message that we have to get out. Otherwise, we're going to keep spending 8 years to get programs done, and people are going to die. And it's going to be the wrong people. So I salute every one of you. So thank you so much for this discussion. You're welcome back anytime. And if I could give you a day, I will give you a day.
thank you guys so much.
Thank you.